First things first, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah.
It's very good to hear. So where I want to begin with is, the Night Sweats were doing really well. Two great albums, received very well. Yet you decided to make a solo record. Why was that so important to you?
As we were making the second record, I had a lot of songs that I knew weren't going to make it onto the Night Sweats record, and not so much even that, because some of those songs didn't make it onto this record either.
Okay.
But I really wanted to do something just different because it had been a while since I had, kind of approached songwriting this way versus doing it with the Night Sweats. And I really wanted, Richard and I wanted to do something together, Richard Swift. And so I was sharing some of the songs with him then that, like songs like, and we had talked about, like making this together and doing it sort of the way he approached the Damien Gerardo records. Like I would just bring him songs and let him like kind of produce the whole thing and pretty much play all the parts other than me singing and playing guitar. But then Richard passed away, and then so I guess this record kind of started to take a different shape where I was kind of writing songs about Richard's passing, and ended up going back to his studio and started the recording process there. And we had like 8 days there, and then I finished it at my house. But then I guess at some point, it became this thing that was an idea to do it with Richard, and then kind of changed into being more about, kind of honoring my commitment to him and kind of seeing through what we had discussed doing.
And you mentioned this earlier way of songwriting for you. Was that something that you kind of missed while doing the Night Sweats? Because it's a little bit more personal, a little bit more, I suppose, inward looking.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, for the Night Sweats, it's like they're kind of defined as what they are. And I always know what they're not, Sure. Like when a song comes to me, I'm like, well, this certainly isn't a Night Sweats song. And so I'm kind of limited to what I write for the band. And it's kind of, it's a little bit of a balancing game to like create stuff that I feel like our fan base will continue to like and something that is the Night Sweats, versus this stuff I can just kind of, do whatever I feel like. And really it's just like, like Richard and I had talked about doing a lot of songs that had like a Harry Nilsson feel to them because of our love for that. And so yeah, I can kind of throw anything I want to at the board and just see what sticks, so.
And is it nice because this is, I suppose, the way you started music and started writing initially? There were more of these kinds of more stripped down types of songs. So was it nice to kind of rediscover that side of yourself, or did you always write amidst the Night Sweats as well?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of am always writing on the side, outside of like what I need to contribute for the band. But yeah, it definitely was nice revisiting this way. It's fun making a live like recording live with a bunch of guys, but then can also be challenging when there's 8 people that have an opinion on something that essentially you wrote. That comes down to it. So yeah. And
then, well, like you say, initially it was kind of a collaborative effort with yourself and Richard, but then obviously he passed away, and that idea wasn't possible anymore.
Right.
So was there a song maybe that kind of you already had, but that changed quite significantly after he passed, and you kind of found a new way to do that song?
Well, I was working on the song All or Nothing when Richard was, while we were still making that second Night Sweats record, and I had played it for him, and he was like, he's like, man, you can't be too Nilsson, and but I think at the time, like the progression like wasn't fully thought out, and or arranged really, and then I had a lot of different words for it, and then finally one day it just kind of stuck. I think the opening phrase started it, and then it just kind of like opened up from there, and then I wrote the song in one sitting. So
okay, and that sound, because I suppose you write on guitar and that song comes out, but then kind of the way the strings are arranged, is that all afterwards, or is that already kind of in your mind?
I hadn't really thought about doing the strings. That was really Pat's sort of contribution,
Okay.
and then we had a friend, Tom Hagerman, write the arrangement, and then reworked that arrangement into what ended up being on the record. And now that arrangement is what the quartet's playing with us when we play live. So.
And I wrote down one line from All or Nothing, which is too much pain and doubt in one little space.
Right.
So that line, what kind of, where did that come from?
Oh, I mean, I'm actually like, that song is sort of like a conversation of me. Like, the line that is previous to that one is, it kind of follows through, you know. It's like, you really found me out, or so you used to think. Too much pain and doubt in one little space. So it's like me telling somebody else, well, not revealing too much of the secrets, but I remember a scenario where a particular person was like, well, I know you. I was like, oh, you do? Well, that's great. Let me know all about myself, because I still don't know, you know.
Right.
So.
Because, well, even before Richard's passing, you've been through quite a lot in the last couple of years. So was it in that sense a difficult record to make, or did the songs just fall out kind of?
I don't know. You know, it was very cathartic. I guess the thing that I'm starting to admit to myself, that part of the writing process for me is actually, you know, like writing about that stuff so I can kind of work through it or relinquish some of the feelings about it, you know. And so it was good, at times hard, or maybe not hard, it's just that like the, you know, the brutal reality of the content sometimes is like, is really right in front of you. And sometimes when you're writing a song, you're so focused on figuring out what's next, and like as you're actually writing the stuff down on the paper, you're not affected by each singular line. And then when you go back to listen back to it, you're like, oh my goodness, you know, like then you have that moment of actually understanding what you're writing about, and that can be kind of, I guess, shattering at times, you know. So.
Yeah, because I can imagine that, for instance, recording the final track, Roshan, that must have been a difficult day in the studio.
Well, I think I did it in like one or two takes, so I just let it. But in the process of working up to that, we tried to record it a bunch of different ways, and it didn't feel right, and that was very frustrating. And I knew the song meant a lot to me, and I remember writing that song at my house just one evening, and I had this, you know, originally I thought the title of the album would be Rush On, because I really wanted it to just be kind of dedicated to Richard. And even the album cover, like when I kind of first had this idea of like looking up into the sky, sort of like a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of thing. I kind of looked at it as like, you know, Rush On, like, you know, but yeah, you know, I just remember when I wrote that song, like, yeah, I guess I knew it was going to be heavy, but I felt like it was so important. It was like everything that I wanted to say to Richard that I didn't really get to say, you know. In some ways, they're like, you know, I guess it's me actually just saying out loud that I understand, you know. That like I think, and that's the thing, I think like we all, what I want this record to be is like we all understand that feeling of like unexplainable brokenness. But I think it would be good if we start to talk about all of us being able to, you know, actually, all of us admitting that we feel that way, and sharing that with other people around us that we care about, so that so we don't feel so alone in that feeling, you know.
Well, you mentioned that word alone, and that's something that I kind of felt came back throughout the record. That sense of kind of feeling alone, but there's always people supporting you. Yet you feel like you're the only one with that problem, or you're the only one dealing with that. So was that important for you to have that? And it's kind of in the album title as well, but to have that optimistic note in it.
Yeah, and I mean that's in even the title track. You know, I feel like that's kind of the theme of the record is, you know, it's the same thing with acknowledging that feeling of brokenness. It's also, regardless of tragedy or those feelings, how do we move forward from that? How do we continue to move forward in hope and not in that place? You know, like I think, you know.
In that sense then, because you also earlier mentioned the word catharsis, so has music been your kind of way of dealing with these kind of things throughout your life?
Yeah, and that's what I said, you know, that's what I kind of meant earlier, is like I don't think I was willing to admit that when I was a younger writer.
Why not?
I don't know, because then it like has this responsibility, or there's this, you know, vulnerableness to that like someone you're with might pick apart the things you're writing and working on, and you know, it's essentially like, you know, dating somebody and they pick up your journal and start reading through it, and then, you know, can like assume a lot of things that aren't real, just, you know, out of you're trying to work through something, and you know, and then you also have to be held responsible for those things that you're writing that you know, may not even be conscious thoughts at the time.
Right.
So that's like kind of unfair, or can make it feel unfair. So yeah, I guess in the past I've just always been like kind of tiptoeing around what I'm writing about or not writing about. So yeah.
But now you went for it, and this is your solo record. So it's I'm not sure how you are going to tour this record, but I'm gonna suppose it's just going to be you and a guitar, maybe.
There'll be moments on stage like that, but as of right now, there's 10 of us on stage.
Okay, because what I wanted to get at was usually when you have a band, it's easier kind of to hide behind the music and stuff. But there is some, I'm sure in life there will be some moments where it's very kind of intimate and personal.
And I like those moments. But then part of me wanted to like be able to play the record in its entirety as I'd like it to be heard.
Right.
And you know, and as a long time like touring musician, you know, in the past I'd make records and you know, do things that I was excited about, whether it be like vocal harmonies or some sort of soundscape, but never be able to have the opportunity to play that in front of people. So I think it's exciting to be able to do all that in front of people, and then at the same time break the show down to just me for a while, you know, or like me and strings, and you know, me and one other person. So
because did you do anything different vocally in the approach to the record? Because well, this is just my opinion, but I could hear a certain a little bit more clarity in what you were saying, and a little bit more directness in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with this stuff, you know, I can kind of just rock through a Night Sweat song, like, or sometimes it just requires me like screaming my ass off. These songs aren't like that at all. So, yeah, and then I guess the voices, like I had a voice on a few different songs that at first seemed like it was like a different thing, but it felt so natural for the songs that I just decided not to question myself for why I was doing it like that. So
right, fair enough. There's another song in particular I wanted to talk about because I found the lyrics again quite interesting, which is "Time Stands." So,
right.
So the line I wrote down is I can take the pain, but I can't take the hatred," which to me is a very interesting line. And it's almost going back to what you mentioned earlier, kind of that self-destructiveness and kind of allowing to take pain, but also not doing anything about it in a way.
Yeah. Go ahead. No.
So where did that kind of sentiment?
I feel like that whole song. I guess I was a bit on a rant about kind of some of the things I see in our culture right now, and so when I say I can I can handle seeing people struggle and then try to find an answer for that, but I can't really, I have no understanding for blind hatred and ignorance anymore. And I just don't, like, I feel like we're moving backwards from a point we probably were leaps and bounds ahead of in the 60s, but, you know, and, you know, even as far as, yeah, just acceptance for people, you know. So it's really, there's a few lines in there, you know, it's like, you know, and I guess it has a lot to do with, you know, I guess the way things are in the United States with Donald Trump being president. It's allowed a lot of people who would consider themselves to be like, you know, servants of God, you know, or believers. And so I grew up kind of in that world. And so it made me want to like kind of question those people, because I was like, well, you say, you know, like to me, it's like you would speak of love while tying one's hands. You know, it was one of the other lines in that song. And it's like, well, you say you're a believer and you serve this God who is love, but then you're fine with like putting kids in cages at the border, or, you know, supporting a president who's okay with that. And I was just like, so really just kind of, you know, calling people on their ignorance, I guess, a little bit, or their willingness to blindly follow such an evil person.
Final question then. You mentioned that you write continuously and you kind of can separate, this is going to be a Night Sweat song, this is going to be something close to me. Can I assume then that you have a whole batch of Night Sweat songs as well?
I've been working on stuff. I never know where I want to go yet with the next Night Sweats record. I feel like each one's been a progression, and it's been, you know, like losing Richard, aside from like the loss of our friendship, it also like, you know, is my favorite collaborator, and so I don't really, you know, making this record with Pat was amazing, because Pat and I worked so much with Richard one-on-one and learned a lot from him. And he was always eager to share us his secrets, I think because we were such a good team, the three of us. But I guess the problem is now is like, who I need to, you know, it's like finding a collaborator outside of just Patrick and the other guys in the Night Sweat, somebody who can kind of see my vision and us as a band and how to like push us forward, and you know, like what direction to really go in. I think like a good example of that is like the Nigel Godrich first working with, you know, I don't think Kid A or any of those albums would have come out of Radiohead had they not worked with Nigel Godrich, you know. And so it's like that finding that collaborator is equal as important as like you pushing yourself to write differently or have a bunch of great songs, you know.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see, I guess.
All right,
That's heavy. I didn't mean to pull Radiohead into that. They have nothing to do with what we do, you know, other than being like creative.
I can understand that you need kind of that outside voice that is kind of objective in a way.
Right. Yeah.
Nathaniel, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.